Kerry hurried to work on a cool October morning. She wrapped herself in a light coat that was out of season. Yesterday had been quite warm, and she hadn't had time to prepare. She made a mental note to go through their things in the evening. It was time for her and Tony to prepare for colder weather. Thinking of her 4-year-old son, Kerry couldn't hold back a smile. He was so serious, so sensible, growing by leaps and bounds. He had been attending a kindergarten for a while now. The boy seemed to understand that he shouldn't cause his mother any unnecessary problems, and he didn't. He adapted to kindergarten quickly, no crying or tantrums like other children. Every morning he got up easily and even dressed himself. Most importantly, Tony rarely got sick at kindergarten, only catching occasional mild colds. Kerry was grateful for this blessing. While her colleagues' children were constantly in and out of the sick leave, Tony stayed healthy, as if understanding his mother couldn't afford to stay home with him. The clinic where she worked, a prestigious private medical centre in their city, wouldn't keep her if she took too many sick days. The facility catered to wealthy patients who could afford expensive treatments. The doctors' salaries were good, and Kerry was fortunate to have secured a position in the surgical department. She and Tony desperately needed the money. Therefore, the woman couldn't risk losing her job due to frequent absences. She knew they wouldn't make exceptions for her, but thankfully she hadn't needed many sick days. Kerry was raising her son alone, carrying the whole burden herself. Her mother lived in the village, struggling to survive on a tiny pension while battling a heart condition that required expensive medication. She needed an operation they couldn't afford, so they relied on conservative treatment for now. As a medical professional, Kerry knew this couldn't continue indefinitely. Soon the medications would stop being effective. She tried saving every penny for the operation, but progress was slow. Her city apartment, though not cheap, was in a decent neighbourhood, close to both kindergarten and work. She saved on transportation by walking, but still had to manage food, clothing, kindergarten fees and excursions. Kerry had given up many luxuries. No beauty salons or manicurists, replacing gym memberships with walks with her son. Nature had blessed Kerry with good genes. Her figure stayed trim, and her skin remained young and fresh, without salon treatments. She tried not to dwell on the future. What would happen if her mother didn't get the operation? How would she manage when Tony grew older and needed more? Studies, activities, tutors, fashionable clothes that teenagers wouldn't do without. For now she was managing. She took extra shifts and part-time work. Sometimes 4-year-old Tony had to stay home alone, a worrying necessity. Luckily their neighbour, Mrs. Tamby, checked on him periodically and fed him, refusing payment despite Kerry's protests. "It's no trouble to look in on the boy," Mrs. Tamby would say. "I can see how hard you're struggling. Keep your money. Buy Tony some apples instead." Initially, terrified of leaving him alone, Kerry gradually realised her son could cope. He quietly played with his construction set and drew pictures while waiting for her to return from evening shifts, seemingly neither bored nor afraid. "He's a good kid," Mrs. Tamby would smile. "Reminds me of my son. I used to leave him alone too, sometimes all day. What else could you do when work cooled and kindergarten was closed? Everyone did it then, and everything turned out fine." Kerry would shake her head. She would never leave her son alone, if not for dire necessity. They needed money desperately for daily life, for the future, and for treating Tony's grandmother, the boy's only family besides Kerry. When Tony was younger, before kindergarten, Kerry's mother had helped tremendously, coming to town to watch her grandson. But now her heart was failing. She could barely leave the village, spending most days in bed, suffering periodic attacks. Kerry's heart was troubled for her mother. She wanted to move her to her place, to see her and take care of her, but her mother wouldn't agree. You have enough troubles there, and I'm better off here in the village. Here the walls heal, the air is special, and my friends are nearby. They look after me. But you? It's hard enough for you, with Tony and your work. You don't need me." Kerry and her son visited her mother when they could, though it was often only possible during extended weekends. The woman was delighted to have her dear guests, but with each visit she looked weaker. At least she had her faithful friends, strong, healthy women who helped, supported and cared for her. All their lives they had been side by side. They were closer than sisters. The children and grandchildren of these friends had long since grown up and become independent. Kerry was a late child for her mother, an unexpected gift of fate. Her mother raised her alone. Kerry never knew her father, and her mother never spoke of him. She dismissed all her daughter's questions until Kerry finished school. Then she finally admitted that she had chosen to have a child on her own with a married man, smart, handsome and deeply loved. This man didn't know he had a daughter. "I never told him anything," her mother explained. "Let him live in peace. He didn't deceive me or promise anything. He told me right away that he was married. It was my choice, and I'm glad it happened this way." Kerry never asked about her father again. She understood the topic was closed. She took comfort in knowing he was intelligent and handsome, and that her mother had loved him. Kerry herself had always dreamed of having a complete family. She planned to study first, establish herself, then find a suitable husband, with children coming only after marriage, to be loved by both parents. Yet ironically, Kerry essentially repeated her mother's fate, except she had been deceived. She had never planned to have a child on her own. At school, Kerry excelled in her studies, always working hard to please her mother and maintain her status as a top student. Learning came naturally to her, especially in the sciences, chemistry and biology. She read extensively beyond the curriculum and often won prizes in academic competitions. Her teachers encouraged her to apply to medical school. Her mother was doubtful, believing that only the rich attended medical academy. "You won't get in without connections or money, and you have no special preparation." But Kerry tried anyway, and succeeded. Then began the intense studies. Medical students had no time for part-time jobs or socialising. The material demanded constant attention if you wanted to graduate. Kerry studied around the clock. During this challenging period, her mother helped financially so she could focus entirely on her studies. Kerry persevered, and finally came the coveted diploma. She felt immensely proud of herself. She had made it to the finish line when many of her classmates had dropped out along the way. The regional hospital hired her in the surgical department. She started by assisting surgeons before performing operations herself. The experience was indescribable, both terrifying and thrilling. She handled various cases, steadily building her skills and experience. Her colleagues noted the young doctor's promising potential. This praise delighted Kerry. Compared to her student years, she now had much more spare time and began socialising with friends. They frequented clubs, bars and discos when they weren't working the next day. It was as if she were making up for all those years spent studying. Then he approached her. Kerry was unwinding at a club with friends, looking forward to a 3-day weekend after a challenging but productive work week. She felt light and cheerful. And there he stood, handsome and statuesque. Kerry could tell he was 5 to 7 years her senior, but he looked like he'd stepped out of a stylish TV series. Everything about him, his clothes, his bearing, his features, his expressions, exuded charm and warmth. When he smiled and dimples appeared in his cheeks, Kerry knew she was lost. His heart immediately sank, though he hadn't spoken a word. The man introduced himself as Nikita and declared that Kerry had struck him in the heart. "You are so beautiful, just amazing. I admired you on the dance floor. I couldn't take my eyes off you." Kerry was no stranger to compliments. Colleagues had courted her before, and she'd had brief casual relationships after university. But no man's words had ever affected her like this. Something primal stirred within her. Her legs turned to cotton, and her body flushed with heat. Her cheeks must have been bright red. She could feel her face burning. Nikita noticed the effect he had on her and smiled, looking straight into her eyes. "Shall we dance?" Without hesitation, Kerry placed her hand in his. He held her close on the dance floor. It became more than just dancing, and when their lips finally met, Kerry longed to be alone with him. As if reading her thoughts, Nikita whispered, "Why don't we get out of here?" "Yes, let's go to my place," Kerry responded eagerly. "I rent an apartment nearby." They spent 3 wonderful days together. Nikita told her about himself. He lived and worked in the capital, but had come to the city for an economic forum to close a contract. Having finished earlier than planned, he had a few free days to explore the city. "I went to the club, and there you were. Such a beauty. I've never met anyone like you." Kerry gazed into his eyes, believing every word. She felt certain he couldn't lie to her. It felt wonderful to feel so special, so unique. Nikita promised to take her to the capital, saying they would live in his apartment and eventually marry. He loved travelling, and upon learning Kerry had never travelled, he immediately began planning their seaside vacation together. "I'll show you such a place. You'll love it. I can picture you now, in a white bathing suit against the turquoise waves. You're made for such places." Nikita received many calls, work, friends or family. Each time he would retreat to the bathroom to speak privately, away from Kerry's ears. At the time, this didn't worry her. Everything felt perfect. She was truly happy. She cherished this chance encounter at the club. She delighted in Nikita's attention and fascination with her. She was grateful they could spend time together before his flight, especially since she had the weekend free. Kerry was convinced it was fate. Destiny itself had orchestrated their meeting. It couldn't be otherwise. She imagined how her life would transform. She had found someone special, a man she wanted to spend her life with. He was so confident, so worldly. He would show her everything, teach her so much. Then Nikita left. Kerry accompanied him to the airport 3 days after their meeting. She struggled to hold back her tears. He appeared upset too. The day before, they had talked extensively about their future. Nikita assured her everything would be fine, that distance meant nothing in modern relationships. They had agreed he would call upon landing. He didn't. At first, Kerry was concerned. She reasoned Nikita might be busy, heading straight to work, or his phone had died. But hours passed, then evening came, with no call. She couldn't call Nikita herself. She didn't have his number. He had written down hers, but she hadn't thought to ask for his. Now she wondered why. They'd spent 3 whole days together. She'd assumed she'd get his number when he called, but Nikita never called. Kerry grew seriously worried about him. The plane had landed safely, that much she knew. But what if something had happened at the airport? What if he had been attacked or fallen ill? It seemed impossible that Nikita could have forgotten her the moment he reached the city. The way he'd looked at her, the things he'd said, it couldn't have all been an act. But Nikita simply vanished from Kerry's life. She couldn't find peace, unable to stop thinking about him even at work. Desperate for any information about her beloved, she turned to the internet. What did she know about him? His name, age, position, and company name. She'd seen the logo on his laptop. It wasn't much, but it was enough. After an hour of searching through corporate photos on the company website, Kerry finally found Nikita tagged in one picture. Following the tag led her to his personal page. What she discovered there shocked her. Nikita was an exemplary family man, a caring husband to a beautiful wife and loving father to 2 lovely daughters. His page was filled with photos that painted a complete picture of his life. There were images of a beautiful large house, family seaside vacations, and cosy holiday celebrations. In many photos, he embraced his beautiful wife, appearing deeply in love with her. The revelation hit Kerry like a physical blow. Her vision darkened, and she could barely breathe as her familiar world crumbled around her. Her soul felt heavy with disgust. Why had he pretended? Why fake being in love? Of course, 3 days of fun with a naive young woman, feeding her sweet lies. He must have done this before, and she had been such a fool, dreaming of a future. Looking back, she should have noticed the signs. Those secretive phone conversations, his overly friendly manner. Now she could see the falseness in every word he'd spoken. Nikita's deception devastated Kerry. She cried into her pillow, repeatedly viewing his photos, despite the pain they caused. She told no one about the brief romance, feeling ashamed even though she wasn't the deceiver in this story. Weeks passed. As her emotions settled and thoughts cleared, Kerry emerged changed. She vowed never to take anyone at their word again, accepting the ugly experience as a hard lesson. Then came another surprise. Kerry missed her period, something that had never happened before. She attributed it to recent stress, not considering pregnancy, since she and Nikita had taken precautions. She had always been cautious about such matters. When she visited a doctor at her hospital for an examination, she shocked her with the news. "You're expecting a baby. About 5 weeks along. Congratulations." Kerry nearly fell from her chair. "Are you planning to keep it?" the doctor asked. I don't know yet," Kerry whispered. The news left her stunned and confused, her world turning upside down once again. After much deliberation, she messaged Nikita through his social media page. His response was brief and dismissive. He offered to send money and asked for providing her card number. Though Kerry hadn't expected much, knowing he was married and a liar, his response still hurt. In desperation, she wrote that she'd have the baby, get a DNA test, and demand child support. "Fine, your choice," Nikita replied, "but I'll take the baby, and you'll never see it again. Who do you think the court will favour? A single mother or a wealthy, well-connected father? Your decision. I already have 2 children, a third won't matter. My wife won't object. She's not in a position to." His response made it clear. Nikita wouldn't help her. To him, she was just a casual affair, a naive girl he'd manipulated. He didn't want complications from an unexpected child. Nikita, skilled at reading people, knew Kerry would fear losing her baby and stop pursuing him. He knew exactly how to respond to the confused young woman. But Kerry realized one thing. She couldn't terminate the pregnancy. She already loved the tiny life growing inside her. This innocent baby shouldn't suffer for having a deceitful father and a naive mother. The baby would live. Having decided, Kerry calmed down. She realised difficulties lay ahead, and she would have to cope alone. There was nowhere to turn for help. Her mother was already sick, spending her small pension on medicines. Kerry had no support, no husband or father. She had to make it on her own. She wasn't the first, nor would she be the last. She'd saved money before maternity leave, preparing for the baby's arrival as best she could. Friends and colleagues helped, buying items and passing down from their children and grandchildren. By the time little Tony was born, everything was ready for his arrival. A crib, stroller and clothes for the year ahead. The maternity leave was hard on Kerry. Savings quickly ran out. Benefits were tiny, and she even had to work part-time in the evenings. But she never regretted her decision to keep her baby. Tony grew up to be lovely, smart and attentive. Sometimes when Kerry was exhausted, too tired even to change clothes and rest, Tony would smile or say something, and her soul would immediately feel warm and bright. It was difficult, but what choice did she have? Kerry persevered until her son was old enough for kindergarten, then returned to work. It helped Kerry tremendously. Her mother's condition had worsened, requiring urgent surgery, and raising a child alone wasn't easy either. Kerry welcomed the additional pay and willingly worked multiple shifts, even nights. Tony stayed quietly at home under Mrs. Tamby's care, so he wasn't completely alone. Still, Kerry felt guilty and anxious about leaving her 4-year-old, but she had no choice. "Late again?" the head nurse, Deborah, asked, eyeing Kerry with contempt. Deborah was considerably older and had worked at the clinic much longer than Kerry, which she felt entitled her to condescension. Though she ingratiated herself with the more experienced doctors, she spoke nastily about them behind their backs, while maintaining an amiable smile. To Kerry, Deborah always seemed like a jackal, her predatory smile reinforcing this image. Nobody liked Deborah, but they avoided quarrelling with her since she had excellent relations with the head doctor. She reported everything to him: who took long lunches, who arrived late, who spent too much time on phone calls during work. "Good morning, Deborah. I'm not late. See, I'm right on time," Kerry smiled. She preferred avoiding conflict with someone like Deborah, generally disliking pointless quarrels. "You should arrive 10 minutes early," Deborah hissed. "You still need to change and you're cutting it close again." Kerry remained silent. She couldn't explain to Deborah this morning's small trials, how Tony forgot his satchel at home and they had to go back, how they navigated around a huge puddle blocking their path to kindergarten. Deborah wouldn't understand. She had neither husband nor children, living alone contentedly, according to colleagues. But Kerry didn't envy Deborah. If anything, she pitied her. Loneliness seemed like deathly boredom to her. Kerry hurried up to the second floor and entered the staff room, where Holly and Mr. MacDonald were having coffee. They both had upcoming patient rounds, and there was still time. Everyone exchanged greetings. Kerry slipped into the locker room and quickly changed into her white coat. That was it. She was ready for work. The day's schedule looked light. Scheduled surgeries weren't until tomorrow. Kerry checked on patients recovering from procedures. Everyone was doing well, which was gratifying. Those preparing for surgery were also in good spirits. Kerry appreciated when everything followed a plan, adhering to protocol. Time flew by until lunch. Kerry enjoyed a hearty soup with Holly in the local canteen. She was heading back to her office to review patient charts when, but suddenly, she noticed something strange through the canteen window. The view from here was of the hospital porch. Right on the steps sat a hunched, dark figure. It swayed from side to side, and Kerry immediately recognised the motion for what it was: someone trying to soothe their pain. No one was near the figure. "Look," Kerry said, drawing her companion's attention to it. "Something's wrong," Holly determined, and the young women hurried to the exit. When they reached the porch, a guard was already sitting beside the person writhing in pain. "What's going on here?" Kerry exclaimed. "I don't know, but she's not feeling well. She can barely speak. Probably drunk," the guard said. Kerry saw an elderly woman, clearly homeless, wearing a tattered old coat with synthetic stuffing spilling out, a dirty headscarf, and ill-fitting grey sneakers. Her eyes were filled with pain and despair. "What's wrong?" she asked. The woman tried to answer but couldn't. She clutched her belly, and Kerry understood immediately, having seen similar cases before. When she placed her hands on the woman's thin, hollow belly, she felt exactly what she had expected. A hard, tense surface. "We need urgent ultrasound and express tests," Kerry ordered. Besides Holly and the guard, several nurses, including Deborah, had gathered around. People rushed to follow Kerry's orders. With Holly's help, she attempted to lift the old woman from the cold stone steps. Every movement caused visible pain. The woman's face contorted in agony. "What are you doing?" Deborah whispered, comprehending the situation. "This is a private clinic with paid services. Do you think this homeless woman can pay?" Kerry met the head nurse's cold, angry eyes. "Well, what's your suggestion?" "Call an ambulance and let them handle it." "But she's critical. Minutes matter. By the time an ambulance arrives and transports her, it'll be too late." "You know you'll be in trouble." Deborah's eyes glittered. "To your luck, the head doctor isn't here. He'd never allow this. I won't either. At least call him for permission." "There's no time, Deborah." With Holly's help, Kerry practically carried the rapidly weakening patient to the clinic entrance, where a gurney awaited. "You'll regret this later." Deborah followed close behind. "You're putting everyone at risk." "I take full responsibility," Kerry replied. "I'm a doctor. Now move aside." Deborah choked with indignation, started to speak, then threw up her hands and vanished into the clinic corridors, likely to report to management. No matter. Kerry would help this woman before anyone could stop her. The ultrasound revealed internal bleeding, confirmed by the tests. There was no choice. They had to prepare for surgery. The nurses efficiently assembled the team and readied the instruments in moments of well-coordinated work. Beginning the operation, Kerry faced unknown challenges. The stakes were enormous. Though survival wasn't guaranteed, they had no alternative. The situation was critical. A ruptured appendix, apparently from trauma, with high risk of peritonitis. Kerry rarely encountered cases this severe. She worked methodically and precisely, supported by her team. In the end, they achieved the best possible outcome given the circumstances. The patient's age and condition were concerning. The woman's homelessness meant likely complications, malnutrition, exhaustion, and probable infections. Kerry desperately hoped she would survive both the anesthesia and recovery. The nurses transferred the elderly woman to intensive care. Kerry removed her surgical cap and mask, washed up, and changed clothes before heading to her office. Paperwork awaited her. Her heart felt both anxious and relieved. After all, a life had been saved. Kerry was worried about many things. The condition of her complicated patient, who couldn't tolerate anesthesia, and the reaction of the head doctor. Deborah was right. She wouldn't be praised for such an initiative, but she couldn't have done anything differently. Waiting for an ambulance or sending the patient to another hospital would have caused delay, and it would have been fatal. At least now the patient had a chance at life, because the operation was successful. Kerry immersed herself in paperwork, and time flew by unnoticed. When Holly burst into the office, it was almost 5 o'clock, Nearly time to go home. "The chief is back," her friend said excitedly. Deborah had already gone to see him, of course. She'd reported everything about the homeless woman, no doubt twisting the story her own way. "They say he's furious and demanding to see you." Kerry sighed heavily. Though she had prepared herself for this, it was still unpleasant. Just then, Deborah entered the office with a radiant expression. "Kerry, the chief is waiting for you," she said, barely concealing her smile. "You'll finally get what you deserve." "And you're glad about it," Holly snorted contemptuously. "Why don't you mind your own business? It's time for evening rounds and you're hanging around here gossiping. Not good either. Maybe I should notify our boss about your diligence as well." Kerry walked on shaky legs to the 3rd floor and slowly approached the head's office. Mr. MacDonald was a man of few words, but severe demeanour. Large, completely grey-haired, always clean-shaven, strict and disciplined. His mere presence inspired awe. He resembled a huge rock, impregnable, cold, impartial. The conversation proved short and unpleasant. He didn't shout or raise his voice, but he looked at Kerry as if she were the most despicable creature on earth. Clearly, Deborah had already poisoned his mind. "You violated all possible protocols, taking in someone from the street, no documents, a vagrant, a homeless person. Did you think about what would happen if she died on our table? What that would do to our hospital's reputation?" There was no way out. "There's always a way out. Protocol would have been to call an ambulance. This woman would have been taken to the state hospital just blocks away. She wouldn't have made it. And what about our other patients? Decent people who pay good money to be treated here. You think they're happy knowing we're rescuing vagrants who could carry any number of infections?" She's human too," Kerry wanted to explain her feelings, but couldn't find the words. How? How could we leave this woman without help? She made it to our clinic with her last strength, fighting through pain. She didn't choose us for our prestige. She just wanted to live." "Well, that's it," Mr. MacDonald concluded. "Finish your shift tomorrow, and we part ways." "What?" Kerry stared at him with desperate eyes. She had expected a bonus cut, a reprimand in her record. Anything but dismissal. It was catastrophic. "Listen, my dear. Your constant tardiness. Yes, I know everything. Violations of work discipline, over-familiarity with patients, unnecessary tests draining the clinic's budget, and now this. Today's act is the final straw. We're parting ways and this isn't up for discussion. The decision is made. If you protest, I'll fire you with bad work references, and you won't be hired anywhere else, so I wouldn't advise it." Kerry nodded silently and left. A whirlwind of thoughts rushed through her head. How would she live now? Pay the rent? How would she feed and clothe her child? And her mother needed money for surgery. The remainder of the day passed in a haze. Kerry mechanically spoke with her son, cooked, cleaned, ate. Everything felt unreal, like a terrible nightmare. The next morning, in the first moments after waking up, Kerry thought it was all just a dream. But then the heavy, bleak reality crashed upon her with unbearable weight, squeezing tears from her eyes. She quickly brushed them away as Tony bounded into the room, beaming. "Mum, can I watch cartoons before kindergarten?" "Sure, honey." At the clinic, Kerry met Holly on the porch and immediately hugged her tightly. "We went to the boss yesterday, tried to defend you, but it didn't work out." Kerry smiled. It was touching that the staff had wanted to save her job. Such support meant a lot, even if unsuccessful.
That rat Deborah is to blame for everything, whispering to him, vilifying everyone. Why do good people get fired while these rats live happily ever after?"
"Well, I don't know." Kerry smiled sadly. "How's my patient?"
"Not bad. She's regained consciousness at least. You saved her life, after all. Well, that's the most important thing, right?"
Holly shrugged. In her office, Kerry sorted through documents while drinking coffee. She hadn't had time at home that morning. As rounds approached, her thoughts kept returning to yesterday's elderly patient. Did she regret not abandoning that homeless woman? No. No, and no again. Even knowing the consequences, Kerry would make the same choice. Yes, times would be tough now. She'd need to find new work, a new income source. But a life was saved, and Kerry carried no guilt about leaving a patient in mortal danger. Such guilt would have been far harder to bear than these sudden troubles. After finishing with the paperwork, Kerry donned her white coat, grabbed her folder, and began rounds. Some patients already knew of her situation, likely from the nurses. They expressed genuine regret at losing such a caring and skilled doctor, wished her luck, and voiced their disapproval of the management's decision. Their sincere words lifted Kerry's spirits. Hope grew that everything would work out at her next position, wherever that might be. With the easy patients examined, only the elderly woman in intensive care remained. Holly had mentioned she was conscious, and Kerry needed to verify her condition. In the corridor to the ICU, she encountered Deborah. The head nurse gave her a scornful look, ignoring Kerry's greeting as she passed by, head held high. Apparently, she no longer considered the young, disciplined surgeon part of the team. Strangely, Kerry felt compassion for Deborah even then. She understood the head nurse's behaviour, a series of personal failures, complete solitude, despite being quite attractive. Her envy extended even to Kerry, a single mother. At least Kerry had Tony, while Deborah had no one. It was easy to picture Deborah alone in her apartment, weeping about her fate in a dark living room. That's why Kerry harboured no bitterness toward her. Now, at the intensive care ward, she opened the door and entered. The patient was awake, lying frail and almost ethereal on the special bed. Wires stretched from her chest and arms, machines humming quietly. Her grey hair was gathered in a neat, tight bun. The nurses had done well. The elderly patient's features held something aristocratic. A straight nose, dark eyebrows, high cheekbones, perfect proportions, and beautiful grey eyes. An elderly countess. The woman turned at the sound. Seeing Kerry, she offered a weak smile.
"So, you're my saviour. They told me about you, described you too. I couldn't remember anything yesterday. The pain had darkened everything, but I recognised you immediately from their description. They were right. You're beautiful."
Kerry smiled. The patient spoke clearly and eloquently, suggesting she was recovering well. Wonderful news. "Good morning. I see you're on the mend. May I examine you?"
"Of course," the woman readily agreed. "You should."
Kerry carefully examined the suture, felt the woman's abdomen, then reviewed the nurse's diary notes. The patient's temperature had remained normal, which was encouraging. "You seem to be doing really well," Kerry said.
"And it's all thanks to you. I was told that you literally pulled me from death's door. It was a very complicated operation."
"Yes, I can't argue with that." The situation was critical and required urgent intervention. You were lucky. 10 minutes later would have been too late.
"Yeah, that's what I've been told. I feel like I've been born again."
"Do you remember your name, who you are, where you came from, and what happened to you?"
I do. Just an hour ago it all came back. Before that, your head manager was interviewing me, trying to find out where I was from, if I could pay for the clinic. I didn't know anything about myself then. He didn't believe me, demanded explanations. He threatened to throw me out on the street. He was just trying to scare you, Kerry explained. Even if he had thrown you out, he would have called an ambulance to send you to another hospital. We provide paid services here, and you? Well, probably have no money, but that's fine. The main thing is that the surgery was successful. Any hospital can help you recover now. There's nothing extraordinary about it, to be honest.
But I can pay for everything, said the woman, giving Kerry a kind smile. Then you won't be in trouble, and you'll be thanked separately.
What do you mean? Kerry didn't understand. She had assumed her patient was homeless. The woman wore an old dress and dirty, worn clothes. How could someone like that suddenly have money?
The nurses told me about your conflict with management because of me. Despite knowing the consequences, you chose to save someone everyone thought was a homeless beggar. That's what everyone assumed I was. It was an incredible thing to do. I didn't think people like you existed anymore.
Well, who would act in another way? It was a matter of minutes.
Many people, dear. Many would have done differently, including that nasty nurse of yours. I don't remember her name.
Kerry smiled, knowing exactly who the patient meant. She'd already met Deborah.
But trust me, you won't be fired. In fact, they'll reward you, because I'll pay for everything, my treatment and even more. And I'll write a letter about you to the Ministry of Health. The country should know its heroes.
Come on, I'm no hero. Kerry was completely puzzled. This supposedly homeless woman spoke with education and clarity, which surprised her. Plus, she kept insisting she could pay for everything and save Kerry from trouble. Tell me, who should I contact about you? Now that you've got your memory back, which is wonderful, your relatives must be worried. Do you have any relatives?
Yes, I do.
The old woman's eyes softened at the mention of family.
But they live far away across the ocean, so they probably haven't had an opportunity to miss me yet. It all happened so quickly.
What happened? The patient intrigued Kerry more and more.
I should probably introduce myself first. My name is Marlena Blitt. You have time, and I see you're genuinely interested in my story.
I am, and I do have time. Kerry had finished her most important tasks and could spend time with this unusual patient. What did she have to lose? Even if Deborah reported her to the chief again, she'd likely be fired anyway. It couldn't get worse. With her next surgery still 2 hours away, Kerry settled on the edge of the patient's bed, ready to listen. Marlena was born into a large, poor family. Her father worked at the factory while her mother managed the house and numerous children. As the oldest child, Marlena helped her mother as much as possible. Feeling sympathy for her mother's poor health, she cleaned floors, cared for her younger siblings, and cooked for the entire household when her parents struggled. Her father worked double shifts to feed his large family. Money stretched only to cover the basics: clothes, food, and utilities. Luxuries were unthinkable. Marlena never asked her parents for anything. She understood their situation completely. She was mature beyond her years. When Marlena turned 15, a tragedy struck. Her beloved mother passed away. All household responsibilities suddenly fell on the teenager's shoulders. It was overwhelming. Though Marlena had always helped her mother and was capable of many tasks, being the helper was quite different from managing everything alone. And she still had school to attend. Naturally, her grades suffered. How could they not? When she had to cook and clean for the whole family, plus pick up her younger siblings from kindergarten. Her father offered no help. He would come home tired and angry,
going straight for the bottle. After becoming a widower, he fell into alcoholism. He would criticize Marlena if things weren't perfect, if the house was messy or the soup too salty. Yet Marlena felt compassion for him, understanding his grief, as she too deeply missed her mother. She harboured no resentment. As time passed, Marlena finished school, earning passing grades mainly due to her teacher's sympathy. Like her father, she went to work at the factory. Her siblings had grown more independent by then, no longer needing constant supervision, but Marlena still carried most household duties. Laundry, cooking, cleaning. Everyone had grown accustomed to her taking care of everything. As more time passed, her siblings matured and left home, moving to different cities for studies and work. They started their own families, occasionally visiting with their children and spouses. These visits always brought Marlena joy. They were her beloved ones, whom she had raised almost like a mother. When her father eventually died from his drinking, Marlena struggled with mixed emotions. Though they never developed a warm relationship, his loss left her feeling deeply alone. Marlena never started her own family. Initially, there wasn't time. Family obligations consumed her days, and her father's alcoholism complicated everything. She was exhausted. Only when her siblings grew up did she finally find some peace. The thought of starting over with her own family, children, cooking, cleaning, felt overwhelming. She had brief romances, nothing more. After her father's death, the weight of solitude began to press upon her. But she felt it was too late. Her peers had grown children, some even had grandchildren. Marlena resigned herself to living alone. Fate had other plans. One day, another delegation visited their factory, as was common for business dealings and contracts. One member of the delegation began showing interest in Marlena. It caught her off guard. Though she often received compliments about her appearance, she had never considered herself particularly beautiful. Her age gave her pause. While this man wasn't young either, he was distinguished, impressive, clearly wealthy, the type who typically pursued younger women. Yet here he was, giving her smiles that made her heart flutter and offering sincere compliments. Marlena decided to open her heart. After all, she had nothing to lose. Elliot asked her on a date. Marlena had never encountered such a gentleman. In his presence, she felt like royalty. He shared his story. A successful businessman who owned a small factory in his town. He had raised 2 daughters alone. His wife had died when their children were young. Elliot had avoided remarrying, scarred by his own childhood experience with a stepmother whose coldness and irritation were barely concealed. This experience convinced him all stepmothers would be similar, so he raised his girls alone. When they grew up, they moved abroad to study. They settled there permanently, leaving Elliot to confront his solitude. Though wealthy men never lack attention from women of all ages, including young beauties, he found their interest superficial. Elliot craved authenticity, genuine feelings, warmth, acceptance. In Marlena, he immediately recognized a kindred spirit and told her so on their first date. His instincts proved right. Soon Marlena and Elliot found themselves deeply in love. And the woman's life began to change. She moved from her hometown to live with him. Marlena had nothing to lose. She had no one left in her homeland anyway. Nothing kept her there except work. Elliot immediately realized that Marlena had no future at her factory, where she merely earned money. He noticed her ability to see beauty and wonder in the ordinary, so he bought her a course from a renowned photographer. Marlena was reluctant at first.
She thought it was nonsense and questioned studying at her age. But as she got involved, she realised this was her life's calling, capturing beautiful moments and sharing them with the world. Soon her works were admired by people from all corners of the world. Marlena bonded with Elliot's daughters, who often visited their father and loved him dearly. She instantly found common ground with the girls. They accepted her, loved her, and together they became a family. Marlena felt truly happy beside Elliot. She had found her passion, and he showed her a whole new life. They travelled extensively, exploring the world together. Marlena blossomed and rejuvenated from the abundance of experiences. Despite their different life paths, she and Elliot were on the same wavelength, understanding each other without words. But the years flew by at breakneck speed. As the couple aged, Elliot retired from business and suddenly seemed to lose his vigour. His heart began troubling him, and eventually he died of a heart attack. Once again, Marlena was alone in their big, beautiful house, surrounded by memories of her former happy life.
Elliot's girls, they invite me to stay with them still. Marlena shook her head. I sometimes visit, but I don't feel at home there. Everything feels foreign somehow. My brothers and sisters are too far away. It frightens me, but here is home.
There was such depth of feeling in Marlena's words that Kerry's heart ached. She understood this elderly woman perfectly.
I have neighbours and friends here. We spend time together, take walks. My siblings visit me, and in the mornings while everyone sleeps, I go to the park to wander the deserted alleys, taking photographs.
But how did you end up in such a difficult situation? Kerry asked, voicing her concern.
Marlena Blitt had spoken so eloquently, and her story seemed logical and consistent. Yet the fact remained, an elderly woman had been found on the hospital porch in torn, dirty clothes. This wasn't how wealthy businessmen's widows typically appeared. Could Marlena Blitt have lost her mind? Was this all fiction? Delusions she herself believed? That morning, as usual, I went to the park. It was still early, the town was asleep, continued Marlena Blitt. And they, 3 young boys, attacked me. Before I knew what was happening, they grabbed me and twisted my arms behind my back. I was terrified, my heart pounding. I would have given them anything they wanted, but they struck my head. Everything became blurry. My ears rang, and through a haze, I watched them rob me. They took my expensive camera, my bag with documents and bank cards, but that wasn't enough for them.
One of the young men yanked a half-conscious elderly woman's coat off her shoulders. It was expensive, branded, something that would fetch good money. The second thief was already pulling off her designer leather boots. They didn't overlook her jewellery either. A gold chain and bracelet, gifts from Elliot. When Mrs. Blitt regained consciousness, she had no memory of what had happened. She found herself in a deserted park alley, dressed inappropriately for the weather. She couldn't remember who she was or where she lived. Confused, she stumbled to some garbage bins where she found an old coat, oversized, trampled sneakers, and a dirty but warm scarf. Though something inside me resisted, I put on these discarded clothes. I didn't like them, but I was freezing. Beauty wasn't a priority. Suddenly a searing pain shot through my stomach, bringing tears to my eyes. I couldn't remember my name or identity, but I knew I needed a hospital. I practically crawled there. Your hospital was the first I found. I managed to climb the porch steps, and that was it. My strength gave out. And then you found me. After the operation, Mrs. Blitt initially remembered nothing about herself. Then the memories returned in waves, making her dizzy. Now Marlena Blitt remembered everything, and her relief was immediate. The fear vanished. She could pay for the operation. She had a home and family, Elliot's daughters, her brothers and sisters. "She's not a homeless beggar at all. It's incredible," Kerry smiled, relieved to know her patient would recover. Feeling calmer, Kerry returned to work at her surgical department. Things had improved since they'd gotten a new head, Mr. Kearns. In place of Mr. MacDonald came a young, energetic man who saw patients as people first, not walking wallets. His compassionate approach and respect for human life deeply impressed Kerry. She enjoyed her conversations with Mr. Kearns, and he seemed to seek out her company too. Holly immediately noticed the sparks between them, as she put it. Her friend predicted a romance between Kerry and the chief. Kerry privately hoped Holly was right. Meanwhile, Mr. MacDonald had been transferred to an administrative position at the ministry. "Handling papers," as the ever-informed Holly put it. Mrs. Blitt's complaint had helped trigger this change. She'd written a letter explaining why the head was unsuitable for his position. Her letter prompted several investigations. It wasn't the first such complaint. Soon after, Mr. MacDonald was transferred. Most staff members celebrated the news, though Deborah was upset. Still, everyone knew she'd adapt to the new boss. Mrs. Blitt kept her promise to thank Kerry generously, though Kerry felt uncomfortable about it. "I'm just a doctor. I took the Hippocratic Oath. It's my duty. I couldn't have done otherwise."
"You knew you'd face trouble, yet you helped a seemingly homeless woman without expecting anything in return. Consider this your lucky break. Perhaps fate was testing you. You passed the test, so you deserve a reward." Marlena Blitt paid for Kerry's mother's operation, and now she was healthy and strong. The mother moved in with her daughter and found work. Finally, Kerry had help with her child, making life easier and more pleasant. She and Marlena Blitt became close friends. They visited each other often, and little Tony came to see the elderly woman as a second grandmother. Kerry often reflected on Marlena Blitt's words about the morning being a test of fate. It seemed that she had indeed passed that test. Everything in her life had changed for the better, almost like a fairy tale. These things happen.